Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Hmm.
Great. Well, first of all, thanks to you, Roz, and to Alessandra and Mitchell for inviting me, organizing this. I'm really delighted to spend a few minutes telling you, all the folks who are online here, a little bit about my trajectory. And I think Roz asked me to do this partly because I've done a lot of different things, and my trajectory is an example of the fact that you can have a very rewarding career without feeling like you have to focus very narrowly from the start, and also without necessarily having any clue what you're going to end up doing along the way. There have been lots of surprises, some wonderful surprises, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about that and how I got there. What I do generally, I'm a systems biologist. I'm trained in evolution. I'm interested in variation and diversity in all in all senses of the word, and especially in how genetics and environmental factors shape aging and age-related disease, and the mechanisms through which they do that using a systems biology approach, whether that's looking at the microbiome or the metabolome, the epigenome, those endophenotypes that lie between genetics and environment on the one hand and phenotypes of interest on the other. I love studying aging for a lot of different reasons. One is it's the only sub-discipline that I can think of that spans about 12 orders of magnitude from the nanometer to the hundreds of meters in terms of the phenomena that we study. And there are probably people on this call right now who are down here studying small molecules and up here studying large mammals or even populations of large mammals or plants. So in that sense, I just love this field. It captures so much, and not only spatial scale, but also temporal scales as well. Throughout the course of my career, I've been interested in two overarching questions. One is how and why we see variation. What is it that generates the variation among species from very short-lived organisms like mayflies, where the adult stage lives just a day, all the way up to very long-lived plants and animals, this being the longest-lived animal that we know of, this clam. So from a day to many hundreds of years. And then the second question is how and why it is that some individuals within populations age faster than others. And that's really what I focus on mostly these days. Just one example of countless examples. What we're looking at here is a plot showing the average speed with which people completed a 50-kilometer ski marathon as a function of age. And there are two important things to notice here. First of all, the average speed declines with age. So not surprisingly, older people are slower than younger people, but also that there's a huge amount of variation. And presumably, the source of this variation is twofold. It's genetics and environment. So there are some people who, for example, might be genetically predisposed to have a high VO2 max, and so they can maintain that high speed for a long time. And then environmental factors, whether they had a good breakfast or not, whether they trained a lot over the past year. So those are the two sort of overarching questions that I'm interested in. And right now in my lab, there are two broad areas that people in the lab are working on. The first is using the fruit fly as a model to study natural variation, to look at genetic and environmental factors that influence variation in aging and our ability to intervene and extend healthy aging. And then the second that I'll tell you a little bit more about at the end is the Dog Aging Project, which is doing the same thing, trying to understand how genetics and environment shape healthy aging through systems biology and many other things in companion dogs. So I want to tell you two versions of how I got to where I am. So I started out here in 1964. I was born in Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm now here in Seattle, Washington. So 35 years ago, in 1985, I wrote my graduate school essay, and right at the beginning, this is me back in the day when I had a little more hair on my head. I said, my goal is not only to be a skillful biologist, but also to serve as a liaison between the science and non-scientific communities. I intend to interpret science to non-scientists and to understand the place of science in the world today and in the future. I remember writing that well, and for most of my career, I thought, well, that was a nice aspiration, but I have to get back to the bench and do more fly studies. But this is sort of where I started, really as an aspiration, and I'll come back to this at the end too. So after my undergraduate degree at the University of Chicago in 1986, I went to Oxford University, where I did my DPhil, the Oxford equivalent of a PhD. I then was a postdoc, and I actually did 3 postdocs. So I started out in Paris. I had the opportunity after I graduated to spend 6 months in Paris in an ecology lab, and I said yes, because who wouldn't? And then I went back to Canada. I did a postdoc at Queen's University in comparative evolutionary biology. And then I did a year at the University of Minnesota. After which my first position was in the Department of Genetics at the University of Georgia for 18 years. And then in 2013, I moved here to Seattle and joined the departments of pathology and biology. And that's where I am now. So that's sort of the technical geographic story of how I got here. But I want to tell you a little bit about how I really got here. And it's a tale of 3 papers. My undergraduate degree was in biology, but it was really a liberal arts degree. I was at an institution where I had to study history and music theory and all kinds of different things. And that's why I went there, because I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I was in high school. Some of you online have known since you were a little kid what you wanted to do, and that's terrific. I was not one of those people. So I got to Oxford in 1986. I knew I was going to work with Paul Harvey, a comparative evolutionary biologist. I went to his office and he asked me what I wanted to do my PhD on. I told him I had no idea. And he said, that's fine, go to the library and come back at the end of the week with a project. I knew very little biology. I went to the library and I lasted until Wednesday. And I came back to his office and I said, I don't know. And he said, well, let me tell you about some projects going on in the lab. He started listing them off, and he told me about a comparative study to try and understand why some species of birds are so brightly colored than others. And I said, that's what I'd love to do. And he said, you can't do that. Andrew Reed is doing that. And then he told me about this paper that he'd written the previous year with Richard Zamuto, trying to understand why some species of mammals are much longer lived than others. This is a screenshot from that paper showing that long-lived species also tend to reach maturity late. So I thought that sounds interesting. He said, okay, here's the paper, try and figure out the next question. So that's what I did. It led to my first paper from the lab, a comparative study of life history variation in mammals. We sent it off to the American Naturalist, which is one of the top journals in evolutionary biology. And the American Naturalist said, thanks, but this will not be of general interest. And so the first message I want to give you today is that if you send in a paper for publication or you send a grant to be reviewed and it gets rejected, don't take it too personally. Since then, that paper has been cited over 1,000 times. So the American Naturalist said it wouldn't be of general interest, and they were wrong. So, and it was published in a fairly low-profile journal, Journal of the Zoological Society of London. So impactful research can be published, and usually is published in places other than the most high-profile journals, and I want you to remember that. I finished the study. I didn't know what I was going to do next, and my office mate, Graham Stone, said, well, why don't you look at aging? And I thought, okay, sounds like a good idea. And this was the first paper I published on aging, and here we are 30 years later. I haven't gotten away from it. It really laid the foundations for my entire career. So this is really the first paper from Harvey and Zamuto that shaped the rest of my career. So I then went off to do a postdoc. I was at Queen's University, and I'd been interested in math and stats. When I was just finishing up graduate school, someone said, Alan Graffin said, you can never have too much math or too much stats. And I had taken almost none. And I felt like I'd missed the boat on that. But there was this summer institute at Cornell University, and that was being put on by Hal Caswell and Shripad Tuljaprkar. And so I went. I was still a postdoc. It was a summer institute for grads and postdocs. I learned some mathematical modeling, some theory, some new statistics. And then I got back, and shortly after that, a paper came out in Nature from Kim Hughes. She was a graduate student at Chicago with Brian Charlesworth. And it was showing that not only do mortality rates go up with age in fruit flies, that's just what's shown here, but the variation increases as well, and that supports Metawar's mutation accumulation theory of aging. I looked at the paper, and based on the modeling that I'd learned the summer before, I thought, that doesn't make sense to me. I think there's an artifact here. And so I started doing some modeling. I showed that indeed there was an artifact. I wrote a response and sent it to Nature, and they sent it to Brian Charlesworth, and he said, don't publish that. So they didn't. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to have to do experiments to show that this is wrong. And fortunately, I had the opportunity to go to Minnesota for a year, work in Jim Kurtzinger's lab with Mark Tater, who was also a postdoc at the time. We began working very closely together, combining fruit fly model with mathematics and statistics and genetic variation. And we came up with sort of a response to Hughes and Charlesworth, which showed that the pattern was actually much more complicated. And ultimately, it led to a collaboration with Kim Hughes, and we published together. And it wasn't the first time in my career that I'd actually written a paper with someone who I disagreed with. And by working together, we tried to get closer to the truth. And that's just something I would like to encourage you to think about, that sometimes controversy is good, disagreement is good. I think it shows a healthy, that the science is healthy. And working together with people that you disagree with can help all of us get closer to the truth in our field. And then there was this third paper that really shaped my career. So in 2007, this paper came out in Science. This was the cover in the top left here, a Chihuahua and a Great Dane walking side by side. The work was from Elaine Ostrander, who's now at NIH. She's a well-known dog geneticist. And Nathan Sutter and a whole host of collaborators working with Elaine showed that a single gene, IGF-1 or insulin growth factor 1, can have a major impact on size. The ancestral allele, which is found in wolves, is associated with large breeds, and then these toy breeds tend to be fixed for a novel allele of IGF-1. This got me excited, partly because I already knew from previous literature that large breed dogs tend to be shorter lived. And of course, that's different from what we see across species, where large mammals are much longer lived than small mammals in general. And I wondered whether it might be the case that the reason that large breed dogs are short-lived is because of IGF-1. And that launched really the next major phase of my career, which is still going, thanks to this paper and being open to shifting into a new area. The reason that the Dog Aging Project exists is because of a very large group of people who are all working together. It started out with me contacting Kate Creevy, who was a veterinarian at the University of Georgia Vet School at the time. And then when I moved to Seattle, working with Matt Kaberlein, and then we built this whole team and created the Dog Aging Project. And it serves as a liaison between the science and non-scientific community. So it took me 35 years, but I finally feel like part of my early aspiration is reached. And then the last thing I'll say about the Dog Aging Project without going into all the details, it's a wonderful example of how working in aging, and those of you who aren't yet working in aging but are thinking about it, I would urge you to do so, because it really brings together every interesting intellectual discipline, societal challenges. It's just the hub at the center of the most intellectually exciting network one could imagine. And the final thing that I want to say in my last slide and my public service announcement is that I really do believe that chance favors the prepared mind. These 3 papers came out. I didn't know that any of them were coming out before they were published, and all 3 of them had a major impact on where I am today. And I would say that I would urge all of you to read widely. Of course, read within your discipline. Be the expert in your discipline, but also read outside of your discipline and be open to the possibility that the most interesting questions are going to be in the in-between places between all of our silos that we work hard to get to know well. And similarly, take risks, embrace the unknown. If you're at a meeting and you have a chance conversation with someone who's working on something and you think, well, that sounds really cool, but I couldn't do that. Take a chance, try it out. And in the same vein, seek connections. And I would say seek connections in all senses of the word. Seek connections between people. You can't know everything. That 2 heads are better than 1. So find people who have expertise that you don't have. Seek intellectual connections between different disciplines, and reach out to your colleagues and support one another. And with that, I want to thank all of you for showing up today, and I look forward to hearing the other speakers.
So I know people are reluctant to ask questions at this early stage now. If we were meeting in person, I'd be going around the room waving a microphone at you to step up and ask some questions. But I think one of the things that strikes me from your experience, Daniel, is that you've always landed with like-minded people, that you found the person who's interested along with you in the task. So this kind of the strength of having colleagues and finding somebody who's like, yeah, let's go, let's just do it. I think that's huge, and it's the essence of collaboration. I think now more than ever, everyone can't know the everything. You have to be able to create a network and bring things in. I was getting some very complimentary comments on your talk, but yeah, I mean, what would you say?
Yeah, and I mean, we're at such a challenging time with the pandemic and the fact that we can't meet together. One of the things that I love to do when I go to meetings with people from my lab is to, if I'm talking with a trainee from my lab and I see someone on the other side of the room, and it might be someone for whom the trainee thinks, oh, well, Roz Anderson, she's way too famous, I couldn't meet her. And I love to sort of drag them over and say, so-and-so, this is Roz Anderson. Roz, this is this person in my lab who's really excited about metabolism. I have to go. And, you know, that taking those chances of reaching out to people. And I know we're being recorded, but Roz is actually on the scientific advisory board for the Dog Aging Project. Ron Kohansky inspired the thing in many ways. He's the one who reached out to me and said, Daniel, you've got to do this thing. And I said, you're crazy. And he said, yes, I am crazy, and you have to do it. And one of the things that we've said right from the beginning, and we have a big team of about 75 people now altogether working together, but we have this rule of no assholes. And there are so many awesome people in science, and one of the things I love about science is that it gives us an excuse to reach out and work with people. And
I do have a question for you, Daniel. Somebody makes a comment about imposter syndrome. And so I guess this is like a feeling of uncertainty, or that you may not have something to contribute. And you are always so welcoming. I love hearing from everybody. What would be your comment on somebody who feels like they're out of their depth, or, you know, how do they get over that, and how do they approach people to make those connections despite feeling that imposter
Yeah.
syndrome?
So again, I know we're being recorded. I will make a confession that I suffer from imposter syndrome. I talk with my wife about it all the time. Most days I wake up and think, someone's going to catch me out today and realize everything I don't know. So one of the things that I think is a really good thing to do is to find supportive mentors who you can be honest with about it. That many of us carry that, and especially in science where our job is constantly to find new limits and go there, and that means going to places where we don't know what the hell we're doing.
Yeah.
To take those chances, be honest about it, find mentors who can help support you. And so the bad news is that I don't think it goes away. I still carry it with me, and I have colleagues I had a colleague at Georgia who wrote a book every year on 20 papers, and he had imposter syndrome. But be honest about it and find allies and mentors to help you work with that, and recognize that's a part of what it means to be constantly working in new areas and taking chances.
And it's fun, by the way. Sometimes not knowing what the heck you're doing is the most fun.